don't know whether I have paused. I'm going to sit here for just a second. Oh, okay. Okay, I'm live. Excuse me. Choking. Pardon me. I would do that now. Anyway, hi, I'm Dr. Cynthia Alease Smith. For those of you who do not know me, I am an anti-racism, anti-white supremacy educator and essayist, and I specialize in writing about alternative perspectives on race, race as color, race as character, racism, and white supremacy. I also take special care in writing about and making people think about potential implications of racialized wording used in the American English lexicon that may not ordinarily be considered. So basically, I make you think about things that you hear, see, read, and say every day. And I point out how there are racialized implications in just about everything you do, see, hear, read, or say. Well, today I'm here because, and I'm on live because I find this is a good way for me to create the video, and hopefully I can get people to join in. I understand that most often when I do my essays, my video essays on Facebook, most people are at work. I'm retired. Most people are at work or doing other things, but the video is out there and you can look at it at your leisure and respond in comments, because I do try to respond back to comments that are made, whether they're made during the live or whether they are, or if they're made after the live is over. I then take this video and I embellish it a bit with my cover and the music and sometimes some graphics, and I put it on my YouTube channel. Head over to www.CAlease-writer.com, and that's CALEASE-writer.com, and you can find all of my video essays that accompany all of my written essays, or most of my written essays. You can also find wonderful wonderful essays by featured writers, and I have a Book of the Month club for my family practice group that I call The Doctor is in Family Practice. Anyway, excuse me. I'm here today because I have an essay that I wrote within the last few days, and I had, well, let me backtrack just a little bit. I had taken a bit of a break, an emotional break from social media and from my website during the month of May, because sometimes this information that I pass on, and sometimes just life events, these current events, these events of late, can have a overwhelming kind of toll, can exact an overwhelming kind of toll on anybody, and most certainly me, because I'm on 24/7 when it comes to racism, white supremacy, racist color, and racist character. So there's always something for me to be upset about, and but sometimes that doesn't always translate into inspiration for writing. Sometimes it just depresses me. But toward the end of the month, I got a little more interested in getting back in gear, and I started observing the term POC. again, because I've observed it and its use over the last few years, and I've noticed how it has become so commonplace in terms of how it's used to describe everybody but white people. And I wrote this little message here, and I said this essay is an observation of a term that, now this is in my view, okay, has become useful to everyone but black people. And why I think it should go by the same way as its sister term of the 60s went in the 70s. Okay? And this essay is called, "It's Past Time to Reclaim Black, When Being a POC Just Won't Do Anymore." Sit back, relax, enjoy the essay, and I look forward to each and every comment, if I get a comment, on this post and on this essay. And you can also read the essay on the at the Baldwin for Medium on medium.com. You can find it also on my website, www.CAlease-writer.com. A dear friend and colleague recently called the United States a salad as opposed to a melting pot. I must agree. The only melting done was primarily among the European ethnicities and nationalities, who all fall under the assignment of white. Nevertheless, there are as many non-white ethnicities and nationalities existing all over the world, all tossed together here in the United States inside a huge virtual hollow bowl. Now, many say this is where the beauty of the nation rests, although the behavior of many of the nation's people would portend otherwise. The most interesting feature of this metaphor is that this salad and the bowl within which we are all flung existed during the 21st century as well. In fact, the individual ingredients of our tossed salad of humanity existed during the inception of the nation, since most of the people living here today have a generational root somewhere else. This essay, however, is not about the salad bowl or its immigrant ingredients as much as it is about a particular group who were not immigrant but captive. Black descendants of the enslavement. Those colorful embellishments in the bowl I will call the black olives, and known now as part of an encapsulated people of color. In the 20th century, integration, or the incorporation as equals into society, or an organization of individuals of different groups, was placed at the forefront of the civil rights movement for black equality, equity, opportunity, and justice as the antithesis of segregation or separation from white people. Indeed, integration was placed before the nation as a panacea, and even as a plausible and more palatable definition of Jim Crow and the system of racism, as though acceptance by the white majority through shared movement of black and white bodies in formerly segregated spaces would be the end of systemic denial and discrimination specifically against black people. Much like its sister term, inclusion, the 21st century also meant a move toward the action or state of including or being included within a group or structure. Now, another important feature of the 20th century was the moniker accepted and used by Black people when referencing themselves. Colored and colored people were the go-to terms for many Black and white liberal types, since it appeared to be more subtle than the term Negro or Negro, most obviously because Negro was a term very easily twisted into a derogatory derivative used by bigoted and supremacist white people. What is interesting to note is during the 20th century, virtually no other non-white person identified with this moniker. Let me repeat that. What is interesting to note is during the 20th century, virtually no other non-white person identified with this moniker. In fact, a parallel movement for rights by Asian people during the same period of the 60s did not see an intersection of their issues directly with Black people, and they did not consider themselves colored. Neither indigenous people from America, Mexican people, or people who settled here from Latin American countries, as well as people from India, Northern Africa, or Arabic countries. Anyone with what would be considered today as darker skinned or darker pigmented people considered themselves colored, or people of color if they lived in the United States in the 20th century. If they did, there was no Blackness of culture or ideology publicly shared with the Negro. Even as Italian immigrants were castigated, vilified, lynched, and terrified in many of the same ways as Black Americans during the early 20th century, as well as described in the press as swarthy, kinky-haired members of a criminal race, and derided in the streets with epithets like Dago, Guinea, a term of Guinea, which is a term of derision applied to enslaved Africans and their descendants, and more familiarly, racist insults like white nigger and nigger wop. They never considered themselves the same as them coloreds, that colored American Negro, and were actually considered by law as legally white, with all of the rights and privileges whiteness entailed. The civil rights movement was understood as a fight for equality for the coloreds and colored people, as those terms related to people with exclusive ownership of that moniker. You understand? Only people with exclusive ownership of that moniker, which were the Negroes, meaning the only true people of color were the descendants of the enslavement, whether born in this country or people who arrived from formerly colonized and enslaved countries in this hemisphere to live in the United States. In short, as far as the United States was concerned, the term colored people was reserved exclusively for people who were assigned that color by white people with the power to define us as Black generations ago. This is why there is a specific element of consternation that I find within this 21st century iteration of the term's inclusion and people of color. In my view, the 21st century popularization of the term inclusion was reduced to a metaphoric corralling, an opportunistic, euphemistically operative word accepted by people whose cultural, sociological, economic, political, and legal and other institutional bent was on continued supremacism and maintenance through the system of racism, and those who co-sign to it because of its generational convenience. Those who signed on simply by virtue of the desire for an existence in this nation within the literal meaning of the word inclusion existed as well, the latter being the most innocent and easiest misled by the former. Furthermore, as was and continues to be the case with ongoing white supremacist dominance in this country, the difference between the reality of integration during the 20th century of white and black people and the reality of inclusion in the 21st century appears to be a change in sharing, from sharing spaces and places to sharing identity. The original stated goal of sharing spaces and places with white people was replaced with an amalgamation of exclusively non-white people who had never before signed on to the moniker of colored in any other way prior to the 21st century, sharing identity with other non-white people simply on the basis of shared color. However, without any conceivable indication of also sharing identity with white people. What this new shared identity among these newly minted people of color accomplished was a bonus to the supremacists who have been for generations trying to revise and bleach the black off the nation. Let me repeat that. What this new shared identity among these newly minted people of color accomplished was a bonus to the supremacists who have been for generations. Black Wall Street comes to mind. For generations, trying to revise and bleach the black off the nation and its association with the enslavement, Jim Crow, and the system of racism completely from its history. And it has worked well as a camouflage for liberals and progressive white people still trying to dilute their individual guilt, and as a way to drown out the unique and consistent struggles of black American descendants of the enslavement, still swirling around and in between all the other ingredients in that bowl in favor of including for the sake of inclusivity, with white people effectively and preferentially separated and segregated once again, living on the outside of the bowl, looking in, outside, all together. For the supremacists, inclusion definitely has its benefits. If it didn't, it wouldn't have become a euphemism in this century for the integration efforts of the 60s. Think about that. Indeed, it would not have entered the lexicon of racialized language used to soften and re-envision the revision of American exceptionalism. Like racism itself, it was retooled for a nation fixated by the perceived pigment of skin, so it no longer had to include white people themselves, except to the extent of tolerating the diversity of people of color through inclusion. Listen to those words, because you hear them all the time. They only have to tolerate the diversity of people of color through inclusion. Just include them all together and then tolerate them all. Make you think. Or it should. With terms such as inclusion, these supremacists can virtually hide the reality of steady denial of history, continued denial of opportunity, and criminal denial of state-sanctioned violence against black people in particular. Black people in particular, while professing to work on behalf of what? People of color. I mean, how many times have you heard, and we do it too, black people do it all the time, when we're talking about our specific struggle, we are going to include, for the sake of inclusivity, everybody else. Like it's somehow wrong for us to claim our own struggle anymore. We can't do that, because then we're not being inclusive. Now, how might a benefit for supremacists be achieved? Let's take a look at the law known pejoratively as the Asian Hate Crimes Law, or the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act, which is what it really is called, for an example. Especially heinous crimes against Asian people were proliferating because of highly bigoted rhetoric from the Trump administration and other racist and xenophobic individuals relative to the COVID-19 epidemic. But understand, it wasn't as though the epidemic was a unique catalyst for the hatred, since Trump's rhetoric on America First drew attention to anyone living in this country who were not assigned whiteness, and especially people who looked overtly diverse, as well as Jewish and Muslim people. The nation was rightly outraged about the violence, and efforts began in earnest to address the violence on local, state, and federal levels as well. What was needed was an effective law to address and provide redress for hate crimes against Asian people. Nothing at all wrong with that. But here is the thing, and I want you to pay attention to this. There was already a hate crimes law on the books for years. Of the many laws passed as part of Lyndon Baines Johnson's legacy, this 1968 statute made it illegal to force or willfully interfere with any person because of race, color, religion, or national origin, and because the person is participating in a federally protected activity such as public education, employment, jury service, travel, or the enjoyment of public accommodation, or helping another person to do so. It's one of the provisions, the main provision of the original hate crimes statute. In 1996, President Obama signed the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act as an expansion to the existing hate crimes law, expanding the federal definition of hate crimes, enhancing the legal toolkit available to prosecutors, and increasing the ability of federal law enforcement to support our state and local partners. Now, that piece that Obama put in was specific to our LGBT plus Q community, but all of the provisions within the original law stood. What they did was They beefed it up so that it would be specific for another community. According to the United States Department of Justice website, existing jurisdictional obstacles concerning prosecution of certain race and religious violence were removed and included additional protections for gender, disability, gender identity, or sexual orientation. So that's what Obama's beefing up of the original Hate Crimes Act did. Okay? Now, it is not specific by design to be more clear on certain race and religious violence. But that is included. However, when reading the law, and this is what you have to really pay attention to. See, all of these things are out there. And I know that most people are not going to just, hey, I think I'll research the hate crimes law and see what it says. So this is what I'm here for, and I'm going to break it down for you. When reading the law, it becomes quite clear. And here's a term that you have to understand throughout this essay. The specificity and uniqueness, specificity, the specificity and uniqueness of hate directed specifically at Black people in the original hate crime statute was not specifically addressed as thoroughly as the Asian population is being addressed throughout the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. Now, 1968, what movement was out there in the vanguard? What movement? The Black movement for equality, equity, opportunity, and justice was at the vanguard. Now, we had parallel movements going on, but they did not intersect. But what the government did, instead of creating for Black people a specific and unique Black hate crimes law or African American hate crimes law or Black protection from police brutality law or an anti-Black lynching law or any of those, they decided to be broad and inclusive, integrative in their approach. So what it does is, you know, the original Hate Crimes Act was not specifically done for Black people, as is the Asian, or as is the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act. And what that does is it renders the original act useless, regardless of its entry of the terms race and color, because it's not specific. Moreover, when determining whether to use the existing law for the Asian community suffering under the weight of white nationalism and xenophobia, it is also abundantly clear the Biden administration and legislature had to have realized the existing law was woefully inadequate as well. Just like I read it and I said, this is inadequate. No wonder it's so hard. No wonder it's so hard to get the Federal Department of Justice to intervene on behalf of black people for hate crimes. No wonder it's so hard to prove that something was done as a hate crime for black people. So they recognized it. But instead of beefing it up like Obama did for, let me read that again. They got rid of some jurisdictional obstacles, meaning states' rights bull. They got rid of some of that, okay, regarding prosecution of cases and of certain race and religious violence. Not sure what they meant by that, but certainly, if done in 1968, black should have been up in there in that writing, or Negro should have been in there somewhere, or colored should have been in there somewhere. And those things were removed and included additional protections. I'm not saying provisions. I'm talking about protections for gender, disability, gender identity, or sexual orientation. Not blackness. Not Negro-ness, not for the coloreds. But therefore, the legislature in this country, the ones that the black people helped tremendously in getting into office, opted to adopt a new law recognizing Asian people in particular and incorporating into it both the new COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act and adding a provision known as the Khalid Jabara and Heather Heyer National Opposition to Hate, Assault, and Threats to Equality Act of 2021. Now, we all remember Heather Heyer. We all remember how she died. Those of you who do not remember Heather Heyer should know that she died as a result of violence perpetrated on her using a car that basically ran over her during the Charlottesville protests, peaceful protests, and the white supremacist elements who violated the peaceful protest. So these two provisions quickly passed. Quickly. The law was written, the bill was written, went through both houses, and was signed into law by President Biden. And of particular interest to you should be the reference in the law in support of an important provision of Title 18 of the U.S. Code, and I'm going to read that to you. Understanding the national problem posed by hate crime is in the public interest and supports the federal interest in eradicating bias-motivated violence. This is important to know, okay? Using 249B1D of Title 18. And the bill actually states C, not D. I'm going to have to fix that in this essay because naturally it throws in the wrong character instead of the C in parentheses. There's a typo. There's actually a typo in the original bill. I found it. It should be D. It should be 249B1D, capital D, and not C. It would appear this provision as written into the bill means each hate crime meeting the qualifications as set forth in the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act can be automatically adjudicated by the federal government without having to be certified by the state of record first, since the crime is already considered in the public interest and supports the federal interest in eradicating bias-motivated violence. Sadly, however, and I think this is an important thing to realize as part of the reason why this new hate crimes bill was put into effect, and why it won't help, it's definitely specific enough not to help everybody, is that Black people are once again relegated to using the original law. Still extremely inadequate and almost impossible for Black people to find any justice using it, because the original hate crimes law relies on satisfying one of 4 certification requirements set forth in 18 U.S. Code 249-4B1A through D, any of which may or may not be applicable or massaged into may or may not be applicable or massaged into invalidity or non-applicability by a given state wishing to exert states' rights, with the quiet acquiescence of a Sessions or a Barr type Attorney General. Meaning, if the feds want to come in and do something, the states still have the option of saying, well, this is because here are the certification requirements. It says no prosecution of any offense described in this subsection may be undertaken by the United States, meaning the feds, meaning the federal DOJ, except under the certification in writing of the Attorney General or designate act that the state does not have jurisdiction, meaning you can't get away with states' rights. The state has requested that the federal government assume jurisdiction. How many of them are going to do that? States' rights. The verdict or sentence obtained pursuant to the state charges left demonstrably unvindicated by the federal interest in eradicating bias-motivated violence. That happens so infrequently, because what has to happen is that it has to be proven that the state didn't do what it is they were supposed to do in order to obtain justice for the victims of said hate crime, if in fact it even qualifies as a hate crime. And D, prosecution by the United States is in the public interest and necessary to secure substantial justice. So the DOJ will certify it if they believe, they'll automatically certify it in the case of the COVID-19 law. But it has to follow all of these other things. So they can not certify it because they might decide, so if you this is why Sessions basically shut down everything related to the civil rights section of the DOJ. And so did Barr. For the Biden government, the necessity to show themselves working in the cause of, you guessed it, people of color, checks all the POC justice boxes, all of the boxes, because it includes the new iteration of what white America accepts as people of color. Let me repeat that. It includes the new iteration of what white America accepts as people of color and appears to show their willingness. It appears to show their willingness to stop crimes against them. Meanwhile, okay, meanwhile, the 3 bills that are languishing in the Senate right now, nothing's happening. Even the one that's named for George Floyd has nothing to do with protection of black bodies from police state-sanctioned violence. And they are in the process of debate, not for the protection of black bodies, but for the protection of the police in terms of qualified immunity. That's supposed to be something that we're waiting for a law supposedly designed to protect us specifically, and it really only basically generally says cops can't do this, they can't do that, they can do this and they can do that, and we want to protect it so that they don't get sued. I just can't, okay? I just can't. The appearance of propriety is generally enough for white people who have allied with their interpretation of BLM, another acronym. Don't we just love those acronyms? The appearance of propriety is generally enough for white people who have allied with their interpretation of BLM as an acronym for the illusionary inclusion of all people of color. See, BLM doesn't even belong to Black lives anymore, because it's Black lives, everybody else. You can use the word all, might as well. And I know I'm probably sounding very selfish to a number of people who have co-signed to that term, POC. But I want to tell you, the term POC needs to find its way into the trash dump of history the same way its predecessor, colored people, did in the 20th century. There is no wonder why the BI was eventually added to the moniker of POC, creating what could eventually become yet another alphabet soup of distinctions for the identity of people. In this case, whose only relationship to each other is various pigmentation not considered among the perceived and coveted assignment of whiteness as superior value. Even with the advent of the letters BI to address Black and Indigenous Americans, the term no longer makes an adequate statement for Black descendants of the enslavement. Yeah. Black descendants of the enslavement. Those black olives in the American salad being increasingly pushed back deeper into the salad bowl and crushed by the weight of the more robust lettuce and other distinct veggies, fruits, meats, and nuts. And which is why POC just won't do anymore. We are the Black descendants of the enslavement, the black olives. Like the 70s, when when colored outlived its usefulness or ability to portray us as distinct and viable human beings. So we chose Black and made ourselves proud within it. It is about time we reclaim Black as our unique identifier for ourselves as ourselves. We are here. We exist. And America better get used to us, because we, the Black Olives, are not going anywhere. Now that brings me to the end of this essay. I hope that you were enlightened by it. I hope that in some instances you were a little pissed off by it. If you have a reason to say, Cindy, you are talking so much BS right now that I don't even have a comment, but I'm going to put one anyway, please feel free to do that. This essay is my opinion from an observation of a term that I think has outlived its usefulness. Tell me what you think in the comments. This is Dr. Cindy. There are a couple of people here. Let me look and see. Hi, Tan. Okay. Well, actually, it looks like there was just one person here, and that's Tan. Hi. I'm going to go now, and please feel free to share this video. I will be embellishing upon it with some graphics and with my theme song on YouTube. And you can please go over to my YouTube channel. You can find it very quickly through my website at www.CAlease-writer.com, and in the next few days I will have that up, and you can share it. Please share, please subscribe to both my website and my YouTube channel. Help me grow and help me in my mission to educate. Talk to you later. Bye bye.